Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of our European People's Podcast series dedicated to the members of the EPP Presidency. And today we are very glad to welcome our Vice President Johannes Hahn, who is member of our member party in Austria, Volkspartei, and of course, Commissioner in charge for budget and administration. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So you are one of our most experienced vice presidents. You have been re-elected for several consecutive mandates. In your experience, what is the added value of these meetings of the EPP presidency?
Well, first of all, it's about discussing main political topics, but also discussing strategic perspectives, because this I consider as the core task of the party, to work on strategic topics, but also to coordinate with the group in the parliament, but also with our member parties. And for me, it's also a good opportunity to get a kind of feedback how certain topics and issues are seen and assessed in our member countries and member states, and by our member parties. And unfortunately, not all of our vice president represent government, parties being in government, being in opposition, and also this is quite valuable for me to see, so to say, the position of the opposition party, in order to have, as a commissioner, a correct and so to say, a broad assessment about the situation in the country. And if it's about budgetary measure, of course, it always affects almost everybody.
Exactly. And so you're in charge of the budget, which is not an easy task, considering that the EU works on a very tiny budget compared to the member state, in front of an increasing number of responsibilities. So how can we get the best out of it and make sure we are prepared for the new challenges that we are facing or we will face in the future?
First, I think it's important to put the European budget in the right context in terms of its magnitude, because very often people are expressed about the sheer number, but one should not forget it's a budget for 7 years, and we are the only political entity which has a budget for 7 years. Number one. Number two, having said this, the European budget is exactly 1.1% of the European GNI. The national budgets count for altogether around 47%. So, I mean, the firepower is a different one. But even with this 1.1%, we can achieve a lot, because we use this money and we can spend 93%. Only 6.8% is used for overhead costs. So, 93% we can use for concrete projects, pursuing our political priorities. Now it's the green transition, digitalization, and with this kind of seed financing, we are streamlining the political direction in Europe, and we quasi guarantee that all member states are focusing on the same political priorities, which, by the way, they decide together, also in cooperation with the European Parliament.
And one of the last big measure was this Next Generation EU, which was quite a big, unexpected move of breaking this taboo of the so-called debt mutualization. But then Russia invaded Ukraine, so we find ourselves confronted with even bigger challenges. How did all this impact or will impact the recovery plans?
Yeah, first, we can already see that the recovery plan is starting to pay off, and already the fact that we have created this instrument in an unprecedented speed, only in a couple of months. Before that, it took us years to react to crisis, has quasi reassured also the capital markets, the economy. It gave a boost of optimism to cope with this crisis. And already towards the end of last year, we returned back to the figures of December 2019, so faster than expected we recovered. Of course, this has to continue. In the meantime, of course, we are hit by the peak of energy prices and as a consequence inflation, and now on top we have the war in Ukraine, and all this of course is now slowing down the recovery process, but it's important also to stress it will not lead to stagnation, not to speak about recession. Still our forecast is much more than 2% growth rate even this year. And as you know, we face also a problem of lack of labor force and also the global supply chain has disruption, which affects, so to say, our economy. There are shortages of products, for instance, in the construction sector, etc. So this is the situation when it comes to this aggression war in Ukraine, triggered by Russia. We cannot yet say what are the consequences, because it has definitely consequences for the Union because of the slowing down of the economy. Also the sanctions we have imposed have to a certain extent some repercussions to us. We have this issue of wheat production, lack of wheat provided by Ukraine, but also by Russia. So in general, we don't have a clear picture because we are in the midst of the war. Mm-hmm. So what we have to look at is now how to finance the immediate needs of Ukraine to keep the country up and running, also the humanitarian perspective and dimension. And second, it's about the reconstruction of Ukraine once there is ideally a peaceful settlement and, of course, the restoration of the territorial integrity. And then we have to make an assessment. I'm convinced that so to say, this can only be financed by a European/international joint effort. And I think Europe should be together with Ukraine in the lead to do this, because it's also to use this opportunity to link the provision of money to issues which are contributing to an acceleration of the accession perspective of Ukraine. So using this tragedy and turn it in an opportunity later on. And of course, if this is agreed, if this is accepted, we have to see what are the most appropriate financial architecture.
So you spoke about the future accession of Ukraine, which allows me to get to the next question, because in the previous commission, in the Juncker Commission, you were in charge of the neighborhood policy and enlargement and negotiation, which has always been a crucial portfolio for the EPP. And there is a sentence of yours that has often been quoted, especially by EPP leaders, and that sums up well the importance of this policy, which was either we export stability or we import instability. Can you explain what this means?
Yeah, it's so to say the summary of what we have to do, what we should do, what is indispensable. I mean, if you take the Western Balkans, they are already today surrounded only by EU member states. And if we allow to produce a kind of vacuum, somebody is filling it. And it should be us who are quasi engaged with our friends in the Balkans. The people there expect an accession to the European Union, and I think they deserve it because they are very much also Europeans like we are Europeans. And that's why we should engage with them to help them to push the economy. If we push the economy, I'm pretty sure that this has also an impact on the rule of law dimension, because the independence of the judiciary system is very important for those who are considering investing in a country, being citizens of this country or foreign investors. If you rely on the system, you are more confident that you can engage in this country than if it's not the case. And so I think there is a mutual stimulation. And finally, I mean, we are confronted with a huge brain drain since many years. And that's why it is not by chance that President von der Leyen first time created a dossier called demographic change. And a colleague of mine, Dubravka Šuica from Croatia, is in charge of it because she knows very well also Croatia is facing this phenomenon, if you want, we have to say problem, so that in particular young people, well-educated people are leaving the country. And this is not good, neither for the country nor for us. So we have to do everything to offer opportunities and to create an environment which attracts again people either to come back or to stay and to work on the further development of this country. This applies for the Western Balkans. The same is for our eastern neighbors. And in reality, it's also something which is important, although the situation there is very different, much more complicated for the southern rim of the Mediterranean. What the challenge we are facing as a European Union is that at our border, the welfare gap is so huge between our welfare level and the welfare level of our neighbors. That's why there is such a pressure to come to Europe. I'm used to say I'm not aware about any migration wave to China, but there are many migration waves to Europe. Very understandable, because here we have freedom, we have wealth, people have a lot of opportunities to pursue their own goals. So from the outside, Europe, with all its problems, is still considered as a paradise compared to where many people are living. And by the way, it's something we often have forgotten. And this is also another aspect which was the reason why President von der Leyen created also this dossier from our friend Margrethe Schinas, the protection of European way of life, because it's really about protecting the way we are living and what we have achieved and what we would like to hand over to the next generation.
And it's this same European way of life and the European values, the reason why Ukrainians are fighting now. It's not just about freedom, it's also about the same value, the values that we share. And probably some of their neighbors were less enthusiastic about the amount of freedom that they were exporting.
Maybe one of the reasons for this war is that fortune and freedom was knocking on Mr. Putin's door.
Exactly.
And because if you look at the performance of Ukraine just before the war, I mean, it was a booming country, a booming society. People started to think about going back because the perspectives there were often much better for them than, for instance, here in Brussels or elsewhere in Europe. So I remember when I came into office in charge also of Ukraine, we organized together with our Ukrainian friends in 2015, I think, an investors conference. We had more than 500 participants from more than 50 countries around the world, because they saw, they looked after Ukraine as a huge potential.
But when you took over the portfolio, the annexation of Crimea had just happened a few months before. So how the deterioration of our relation with Russia following this impacted your work, your priorities back then?
Well, I mean, there was a steady decline of trust after all this, because I remember Russia guaranteed the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine in 1993 in exchange of nuclear weapons, etc. And now we have seen first Crimea, second Donbass, and now the entire country. But I have to say it's Putin's war. And I think we should differentiate between Putin and his collaborators and the Russian people. Because as we know, they receive wrong informations. They have been brainwashed for many years. So it's not surprising how some reactions are in the country or what some opinion polls are saying. So I think the problem is with Mr. Putin. But of course, we have to see, nevertheless, to settle this conflict. Currently, and I am not the only one, unfortunately, it looks like that any other solution than a military is not achievable. But we have to help and assist the Ukrainians with all our means because they're also fighting for our values.
But there's also a completely different but also worrisome situation at our doors, often overlooked, I think, that is the one of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Do you see a way out of this impasse, which many people don't know about, actually?
Yeah. With my experience of the past, I would say, in general, we're having three main topics in the region or challenges. The one we have almost resolved or contributed to resolve it is the name issue of North Macedonia. Now they are still blocked by Bulgaria. I hope this can be resolved soon and then negotiations can start. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that once the North Macedonians are entering negotiations, they can be very soon best pupils in the class if it comes to accession approximation. And this might trigger also some dynamics to the two other big issues. The second is the relationship between Belgrade and Pristina. And the third is, of course, Bosnia-Herzegovina, probably also in the order of a possible resolution. And the more problems we solve and we remove, I think the more dynamic is created. Because one of the big issues I already proposed and preparatory work has started is, for instance, a common regional economic zone area in order to prepare them for a future accession. Because we have seen in the past between the status of a candidate country, a pre-accession level, and being member is a huge difference, triggering a lot of problems. And I think we should learn the lessons from the past to help future members phasing in the membership, so that what we proposed already in our West Balkan strategy in 2017-18, once certain chapters or today clusters are negotiated and concluded, those countries should have already a privileged access to certain formats, councils at the European Union level, so that they already can become familiar, can participate in the decision shaping and feel, so to say, already as a member, which, by the way, might also motivate them to conclude the other chapters. So I think it's a positive domino effect. And of course, maybe we should also provide more money as a game changer to speed up certain processes. So I think it's about political will on both sides, determination, but of course a certain sequencing of the resolution of challenges is definitely helpful.
There's a step-by-step approach that actually seems to be getting momentum with the several leaders. So you're Austrian, and there's been a lot of talk about Austria recently as a possible model of neutrality for the future of Ukraine. But what does neutrality means to you as an Austrian?
Well, it was a concept which was not at that time, talking about 1955, voluntarily chosen, but it was considered at that time a necessity to get the signature of all occupying countries in Austria, meaning in particular the then Soviet Union. So we declared our eternal neutrality as a precondition to get the state treaty, which finally led to the voluntary withdrawal of troops from the Austrian territory. And when the last soldier left the country, the national parliament adopted this so-called neutrality law. In the meantime, it became part of the DNA. But I think there must be always an adaptation to recent developments. And I think the government was crystal clear this time that we are military, or that Austria is military neutral, but not politically. It is crystal clear. Our values are the values of a democratic society. Otherwise, we couldn't have become members of the Union. And of course, I think it's up to the Austrians to discuss in the future this status. So far, it was not a problem, and they participated in many also defense initiatives. For instance, PESCO. They have now also participated in the provisioning of the peace facility by applying the so-called constructive abstention, enabling the supply of weapons to Ukraine. So I think the position of the Austrians in terms of whom to support, it's crystal clear.
Yeah, neutrality doesn't mean indifference. Let's conclude as usual on a lighter tone. You're from Vienna, which is constantly ranking among the top cities in the world for the quality of life. What does make this town so special, and what do you like the most about it?
Well, for instance, the president of the state is living in the parallel lane to where I'm living in, if I'm in Vienna. And we both own dogs, and it can happen that we meet each other doggy walking. Yeah, he has one bodyguard who is very discreet. Yeah, but you can meet him, you can talk to him. In Austria, and I hope it stays, there are only two people having a permanent personal protection. This is the president of the state and the prime minister. In general, I would say it's a world city which has kept its character being like a village.
Very good. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, for being here and answering our question. It was a very interesting discussion. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for today's episode of the European People's Podcast. And as usual, don't forget to subscribe so as not to miss out and catch up with any episode you might have missed. Goodbye and see you for the next episode.